Krystal, what are you taking a look at?
Well, guys, buried inside of a devastating poll for Biden was a particularly devastating and also revealing little nugget. Not only was Biden's approval rating at a rock bottom 33%, but the youthful base of the Democratic Party has almost completely fled. A measly 21% of voters under the age of 35 say that they approve of Biden's performance in office. 58% disapprove and 21% say they're not sure. Now, that 21% approval rating was actually the lowest of every single age group, and it was actually the lowest of every type of demographic cohort that was tested, except for one, and that would be non-college educated voters. They gave Biden just a paltry 20% approval rating. Just to give you a comparison for how bad that performance is among voters under 35, Donald Trump, in the very same poll, at the very same point in his presidency, was able to get a comparatively somewhat better 31% of young voters to say they approved of his performance. 58% disapproved and 11% said that they did not know. So Biden is actually doing even worse with young voters than Trump did. Or, if you want another comparison here, in his successful 2020 presidential campaign, President Biden won Millennials and Gen Z by 20 points. Now, what's interesting is that in 2020, the younger the voter was, the more support Biden garnered. This Quinnipiac poll has the exact opposite dynamic. The older the voter is, the more likely they are to approve of Biden. His strongest support is actually among voters 65 and older. That's the only age cohort where he is above water, albeit narrowly. So what's going on here, guys? Well, it's honestly a perfect storm. You got a generation that's been completely screwed by our economic system, is disgusted with both parties at this point. You got a Democratic political class determined at every turn to show contempt towards young voters. And you got a few obvious broken promises on some really key issues. Just take a look at this. Let's start with the last part first. Broken promises. Biden ran on free community college. Not only has he not done that, but he refuses to do anything to cancel student debt, something he could easily accomplish with the stroke of a pen. Student debt is one of the key reasons why Millennials and Gen Z are falling so far behind their parents' generations when it comes to things like buying homes and starting families. 57% of Gen Z enrolled in 2 or 4 year colleges, so a solid majority of this new generation are going to college with all the debt burden that entails. But that's really just the start. Literally 80% of young voters support legalizing marijuana. A majority of voters under 35 actually say that decriminalizing marijuana should either be a top priority or an important priority. Biden, he could deschedule marijuana tomorrow, but also flat out refuses to do that. Young voters are also more pro-union than any other age group, something we covered in the show, something they're demonstrating in real time by leading a new resurgent labor movement, which is upending the pro-boss status quo. Biden promised to be the most pro-union president in history, but won't use even the basic powers at his fingertips to block union-busting companies like Amazon from receiving federal government contracts. The top priorities of young voters are jobs, climate, and healthcare. I don't need to tell you that Biden has failed to deliver significant changes on any of these 3 key areas. Now, this lack of action is combined with Democratic Party contempt for young voters, which ranges from thinly disguised to completely unmasked disgust. You might recall that during the book tour that led up to his presidential campaign, Biden himself kind of let slip how he actually felt about young people.
And so the younger generation now tells me how tough things are. Give me a break. No, I have no empathy for it. Give me a break.
No empathy. Well, it certainly shows in how he's governed, doesn't it? Remember, too, these are voters who overwhelmingly backed Bernie Sanders in 2016 and again in 2020. In fact, Bernie in 2016, he won more young voters than Hillary and Trump combined. It wasn't even close. They represent the most progressive generation in history. But the establishment of the party acts like the left candidates from Bernie to Nina Turner need to be shamed, scolded, and crushed in every possible way that they can. From Pelosi deriding the youth-driven Green New Deal as the Green Dream or whatever, to Biden saying he'd veto Medicare for all if given the chance, to Obama constantly chastising voters for daring to expect anything significant from their elected leaders. It's not so much that young voters are leaving the party as the party is pushing them out and locking the door. They're happy to have their votes, of course, but then they'll spend 4 years all day, every day shaming them for daring to want anything better than the hellish landscape that the boomers are handing them. In the 2020 primary, I was always struck by the generational divide and how Democratic voters were evaluating their choices. In every poll we looked at, young voters said they cared most about the issues, and older voters said they cared most about beating Trump. I think it's probably because for people who came of age during the Iraq War, the financial crash, or the pandemic, they got a pretty good idea that just beating Trump is really not going to cut it. They've seen enough with the collapse of the promise of the Obama years to realize that the Democratic Party has consistently failed them. It's not that young voters are going to turn to Republicans. That party is at odds with them on literally every issue and has perhaps even greater contempt for young Americans. But they might just stay home. Or in a nightmare scenario for the Democratic Party, they might get pissed off enough to back their own candidate against Biden. Lord knows, with his approval ratings as low as they are, there's enough blood in the water for someone to mount a credible primary challenge. You can only spit in the face of these generations for so long before they figure out how to make you pay. I think this is one of the most underreported stories in American politics. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.